Hey everyone, Tactics here, nearing the end of my Season 2 Mythic Plus Guide series, where in this video we're covering the returning Mechagon workshop, going over the adjustments made to various boss encounters and trash mobs, as well as giving you the rundown on every important ability to be aware of. If you're looking for guides to the other dungeons this season, you can check them out over on my channel or linked down in the description below. Plus, I've got a ton more Mythic Plus raid and tank content planned for the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel as well. Otherwise, let's start with the first boss room, which has a lot more trash added to it now this season, so no more having your tank solo the entire room. That being said, the environmental abilities here do still happen, so you want to watch out for both the saw blades that spin around the room in random patterns, as well as the hammers around the edge of the room, which will try and smash down on players that get too close. In terms of the trash in this area, the rocket tonks will spawn circles that you want to avoid, and the striders will just hit the tank for some extra damage. The important thing, though, is on the bomb tonks and their detonate cast, which will do heavy fire damage to your group if not interrupted, so make sure you always kick these. After clearing the room, you'll be able to take on the Tussle Tonks, which has seen some significant updates for Season 2, where you'll now be dealing with both bosses together for the entire duration of the fight, as whenever one dies, it'll begin to channel Electrical Storm onto your group, which quickly becomes too much damage to heal. This means you want to watch their health and make sure you adjust which one you're hitting, as they need to be cleaved down evenly. Looking at No Mercy's abilities, Battle Mine causes the boss to throw out mines under random players for a few seconds, which activate after a delay and will deal heavy fire damage to anyone who touched them. You want to stay relatively grouped here in order to cluster these mines into the same area and then rotate away as needed. If you're really tight on space or just get some bad mine spawns, you can always use things like immunities here to clear some of them out. You also want to be aware of No Mercy's other ability, Foe Flipper, which is a 6-yard AoE around a random player that also knocks them back, so make sure if you're the target here that you do not get knocked back into any of those mines. No Mercy's ultimate ability is Maximum Thrust, which is cast at 100 energy and causes the boss to charge in a line forward towards the tank, dealing heavy damage to anyone it hits, and spawning several more mines on impact. I recommend having your tank point this towards the closest wall to help with cleave uptime, and then when the mines spawn, just make sure people are avoiding them. Moving on to the Platinum Pummeler, players want to watch out for the tank hit Platinum Pummel here, as it cleaves anyone within 6 yards of them. You want to do your best not to move when this cast starts, just to make dodging your circle a bit easier for the rest of your group. For healers, you want to make sure you're prepared for the Ground Pound channel, which deals heavy damage to the group over the duration. Finally, the ultimate ability here is Platinum Plating, which gives it a 33% damage taken reduction until removed. In order to remove it, you'll need to hit the boss with one of those piston smasher hammers that we discussed at the beginning of this video. So tanks, you want to make sure that you are positioned near one of these hammers when this boss is nearing full energy. Know that the pistons are unusable for 1.5 minutes after they successfully remove a stack of plating, which means you'll need to rotate around the room to the next hammer after putting one on cooldown. From there, you can jump down towards the next trash mobs, which have seen some significant updates. The waste processing unit has the puncture ability similar to the motherload unit, and that's just a tank hit that also applies a bleed, so be aware of that. Use defensives and bleed cleanses if you have them. The AoE damage this does is Mega Drill, which channels for 5 seconds and deals heavy damage to your group, so healers will want to be prepared for this, and if anyone is ever taking other damage while this happens, you'll want to press a defensive. In terms of what that other damage could be, could come from the Metal Gunk mobs, and these guys have a single ability in Corrosive Gunk. This shoots out at 3 random players, and it also applies a healing absorb to anyone hit, so you want to be careful when this goes out. Healers will need to give these players a little bit of extra love. The other major mob in this area are the Junkyard Dogs in the boss room. They have a single ability in Fiery Jaws, which is a random target hit and magic dot that is pretty nasty here, so you want to make sure that you get this dispelled as quickly as you can, and targets may want to just hit a defensive anyways, especially as key level goes higher. After clearing out the dogs in this area, you can take on their leader, K.U J.0, which is an encounter that heavily revolves around the junk cube terrain that occasionally gets airdropped into the arena over a random player. When hit by a boss ability, these cubes will begin to glow, and then hit with a second boss ability, they will explode for lethal damage and within 8 yards, so you want to make sure that you are staying away from any glowing cubes. In terms of abilities that will affect these cubes, the first is Explosive Leap, where the boss jumps between 3 random players, dealing an 8-yard AoE hit around each. Targeted players here will want to make sure that they spread out so they don't cleave each other, and they don't cleave any of those junk cubes either. If you're quick, you can also use a combat drop like Feign Death or Shadow Meld while the boss is leaping at you to cancel the attack entirely. The other ability that damages cubes is Venting Flames, which deals lethal fire damage to anyone within line of sight over 3 seconds and hits all cubes in the arena. To survive this, you can have your group hide behind one of the undamaged junk cubes, safely taking no hits from this channel. If there's no undamaged junk cubes available when this cast begins, you will likely wipe, which is why avoiding them with the explosive leap hit is so important. For tank damage, you've got Blazing Chomp, which applies a magic dot that deals heavy fire damage each second for 3 minutes. The problem here is that when dispelled, it also deals a large hit of group damage, so you want to dispel it quickly to reduce tank damage, but you also want to make sure that the dispel happens when the rest of your party is healthy. Tanks, be ready to use a defensive for these ticks, especially if you have to hold the debuff for a few seconds to prevent something like a lineup with explosive leap. After defeating Kujo, you'll need to avoid some flamethrowers while running on a conveyor belt to get to the next area of the dungeon. Note that things like leaps and warlock gates can actually let you cheat this section a bit, allowing you to quickly get to the end and hit the red button to disable this mini gauntlet. The trash beyond this is also new here. You've got the spam casters in Mechagon Tinkerers. They've got the Giga Wallop ability, so keep interrupts on that. Otherwise, they'll occasionally shoot out a squirrel, which can no longer be mind controlled, so no tech there, but you just want to make sure you avoid the explosions that these squirrels create. There's also some debuffs going out here from the defense bots. Both Mark 1 and Mark 3 will apply Arcing Zap to random players. Just a magic dot here, so dispel as many as you can, but sometimes there are too many going out at once, so players that have a magic dot will want to make sure that they use a defensive going into the short out ability from defense bot Mark 3. This is just some channeled AoE hits on your entire group, usually on its own not dangerous, but with that Arcing Zap dot out, that's where you are in danger. These Mark 3 bots will also occasionally just throw up a shield on themselves, which you can purge as a magic effect, or you can just destroy it. After defeating a couple waves of mobs, you'll take on the Blastatron X80 mini boss. This guy has a passive and high explosive rockets, which basically means it's constantly dealing pulsing damage to your group every 4 seconds. So healers, you want to make sure that you have constant throughput available when this mob is being fought. There's also a random target line ability in Sonic Pulse, so you want to make sure that you are avoiding. And outside of that, you have the Capacitor Discharge ability, which the boss channels for 12 seconds and splits the room into a safe area and an unsafe area, where 3/4 of the room is not safe. And then this changes up 3 times over the course of the channel, so you always need to continue moving to the new safe area. Moving towards the boss, there are Mechagon mechanics. They've got another interrupt in Tune-Up, which heals a random mob over 3 seconds. So you can also use a CC here to stop that channel while it is mid-cast. Overclock is their other ability, which gives a magic buff to nearby robotic allies, increasing their haste by 20%. So if you have a purge available, make sure to use it there. Workshop Defenders are the final mob here, and they have one single ability in Shield Generator. They'll basically just occasionally spawn this bubble around themselves, and anything inside the bubble takes 75% less damage until it is destroyed, or for 20 seconds when it expires. And that includes players here, so you can actually use these bubbles to mitigate some of the damage we talked about, like the Arcing Zap Magic Dot, like the short out AoEs. That can be used to your advantage, so make sure 1, you pull the mobs out of it, and 2, other players can get inside of it. Now, before reaching the Machinist Garden encounter, you'll need to make your way through a maze of patrolling Detectobots, which will send you back to the beginning of this maze if you ever get caught in one of the circles around them. You also can't use any abilities to CC these robots due to their reflective armor passive, so you need to dodge your way through them as best you can. To help, there are several vents throughout this area that you can hide in, causing any boss to be unable to detect you while you're within them, allowing you to wait for better patrols before continuing. After making your way through the Gauntlet, you can take on the Machinist Garden fight, which is an encounter that has a lot of avoidable mechanics that you'll want to watch out for. The first is Self-Trimming Hedge, which launches out a blade that bounces around the arena, dealing physical damage to anyone hit. The second is a Discombobulator, which is a circle thrown out at a random player that will deal heavy nature damage and apply a magic disorient to players that are still in the area when it blows up. Make sure you are avoiding both of those abilities. You'll also want to watch out for the Hidden Flame Cannons, which the boss activates at 100 energy, causing 3 beams of flame to erupt from the center of the room while rotating clockwise for 10 seconds, applying a heavy dot to anyone they touch. Try and have your group stay in the same third of the room here if possible and just rotate together, but it's not the end of the world if a ranged player is in a different section than the melee. Outside of this, the boss will occasionally summon an inconspicuous plant somewhere around the room, which just channels Blossom Blast into the closest player. Make sure to run over to these mobs when they spawn and cleave them down quickly on top of the boss. A useful tip here is to have a stun ready for every single time this ad spawns, which you can immediately throw out on the ad as soon as you see it, and that allows your tank to get into melee range and be the closest player once that stun ends. That forces the plant to attack your tank specifically, as opposed to a squishier player that is closer to the mob, making the damage much easier to handle. Beware that after killing these mobs, the flame cannon will ignite the oil fountain that they leave behind, causing fire circles to constantly shoot out in that part of the room. From there, most of the mobs are pretty familiar. There's one new mob in Spider Tank, but this guy just has the same high explosive rockets and sonic pulse abilities that you saw on the Blastatron X80. After fighting your way past all of these familiar mobs, you'll finally be able to take on King Mechagon, which is a two-phase encounter, starting with the boss inside his aerial unit. While in this phase, the boss does not melee, instead opting to fire pulse blasts at the tank for nature damage, so keep that in mind. Physical melee attack mitigation does not help you here. For everyone else, you'll notice 4 plasma orbs on the ground, which deal damage and knock back any players who touch them. Occasionally, the boss will use Recalibrate, causing these orbs to shoot in a line towards random players, dealing damage to all players in the path, as well as in a 6-yard AoE upon reaching their new destination, so make sure you are avoiding these. There's also some additional random target damage in the form of Mega Zap, which shoots out in a line towards a random player and applies a 12-second dot to any one hit. I recommend having the targeted player stand still here, while the rest of the group make sure that they aren't in the path of this ability. This is also a good spot to press a defensive if you're targeted. For group damage in this phase, the boss will use Take Off, launching into the air with an 8-yard AoE and then chasing down a random player with Cutting Beam. This deals lethal damage to anyone that gets too close to the beam, but it also pulses for light group damage over 6 seconds, so just make sure you're ready for that. Also, if you are the fixated player here, make sure you are running away from the boss without causing the beam to hit your group, so straight lines across the room here are ideal. Once you defeat the aerial unit, King Mechagon will stun the group and hop into his Omega Buster, starting the second phase. Tanks, beware, in this phase the boss is stationary, so you need to make sure that you are in melee at all times, otherwise you'll trigger Protocol 99, which is bad news for your group. In this phase, Mega Zap continues to happen, however, the line is significantly larger and it now fires out 3 times in a row, so it becomes very important to not be cleaved by this ability, otherwise you'll take excessive damage. It can be helpful to have melee players stand on the far sides of the boss's hitbox here, as this allows you to safely fire your beams down the outer wall of the arena, which allows ranged players in the middle of the room to have an easier time. On top of this, you'll also still need to dodge the plasma orbs in this phase. However, there's some additional movement now outside of Recalibrate, as the boss will occasionally throw out a Magneto Arm, which pulls all orbs and players towards it for 9 seconds. While pulling, this also deals pretty heavy group damage, where the damage is actually reduced by your distance, so be ready to use movement abilities here to get as far away as possible to reduce your damage intake. And healers, of course, will want to make sure that they have something, whether that's healing CDs or defensive CDs, prepped for this cast to ensure the group survives. After defeating the Omega Buster, King Mechagon is left defenseless, and your group can quickly kill him to end the encounter. But there we have it, guys, the revamped Mechagon workshop for the War Within Season 2. Hopefully you learned something here, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like it. Again, like I said, we got a ton of great stuff planned over the next few weeks. Mythic Plus, Raid, Tank Guide content, we've got it all, so make sure you're subscribed. I also stream here on YouTube and over on Twitch, so make sure you do stop by and say hi. Otherwise, shout out to all of my Patreons for their continued support, and I'll see everyone in the next video.